Hello, I'm Soul, and this is what I'm going to call Project 14. It's going to be a series of videos where I take a look at one of MMO gaming's biggest franchises, Final Fantasy XIV Online, from the perspective of a World of Warcraft fan and commentator. I'm gonna do a pretty long intro, so use the navigation bar below to skip whatever you need to if you feel so inclined. So what do I mean by giving my perspective? Like, more and more over the past couple of weeks or months or so, we've been seeing posts and tweets and videos from self-proclaimed refugees fleeing the World of Warcraft and into the waiting arms of Final Fantasy XIV. That, by the way, has a free trial up to level 60, including the award-winning Heavensward expansion. I'm just going to refer to Final Fantasy XIV as 14 for short going forward, but anyway, many of these folk offered no less than a referendum to World of Warcraft's flaws, to which there are many, while elevating everything that 14 does right, which to them amounts to many. It just takes a simple YouTube search to find a lot of these little distillations of WoW versus 14 and why I left, with reactions to the game and so on and so forth. So what do I have to offer, Mr. WoW shill? What do I have to offer? What I hope to bring to you are honest and measured takes on the game. And in this series, I want to appreciate what 14 has to offer. I want to examine what it is that feels so compelling about the game and see how it stands against the World of Warcraft, while also appreciating that's made it popular for so long. The challenge, of course, is going to be to avoid making this come off as some bad faith analysis, given my obvious bias. But for those who are familiar with my work, while I try to give off some positive energy, I do have all sorts of deep criticisms of World of Warcraft that just don't outweigh my overall enjoyment. I just kind of salt the wound every now and then when I think it's appropriate. So in short, yeah, it's going to be a series of comparisons and appreciation and criticism of both games. This is not one game versus the other. There's no score, there's no winners or losers, and I'm fully aware that there is a lot of time and dedication that goes into these games that become a really deep, personal, emotional investment, but these are video games, not religions. But of course, for the sake of the algorithm, it reflects all the same, right? Like, we get big content creators announcing that they're gonna try another game out, and it just blows people's minds like, yeah, they're joining our team. Or it's like, no, this is a betrayal. I mean, yeah, it makes news and it gives them attention, but not to blow your mind, folks, but that's kind of what content creators do. Anyway, I digressed. I'm not here to sell one game or the other. Neither game is gonna come out of this study unscathed. I'm gonna sing my praises, but I'm also not gonna be kind. Some of my takes are going to be pretty spicy, but I guarantee you that they are honest and genuine. To really set this up though, you've got to know where I'm coming from, and to that end, you've got to know not just my intentions, but my perspective. You got to get to know me a little bit personally. So another reminder, there's that navigation bar below. But I do think it's going to help later on when you're like, whoa, this guy has like no idea what he's talking about. Learning more about me is going to change that to maybe, okay, I know where he's coming from, but man, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. So about me, I've played World of Warcraft since its beta. I've gone through every expansion. I've never lapsed on my subscription. I've gone to pretty much every BlizzCon. That's the big convention where we blow a lot of money. But I'm not part of what you would say is the upper echelon of players. I'm no mythic, or I'm not a top-end raider. I'm not a PvP murder god. I really don't have a lot of actual mastery over the game. I'm not that good at it. I just enjoy logging on each day to do a little something or other. And I do raid, so you can say that I'm like a mid-tier sort of player. I run a guild that's somehow lasted for 14 years, and from that, I've formed friendships. I've watched folks grow up and get married and have children. I've seen other folks grow distant. I've had fallout. I've lost one due to illness, but I continue carrying the torch. The class that I play is a paladin, and through, I'm a tank, straight up. Anything else that I do in-game is a joke, with the exception of making lots of gold, and I have the prestige to show for it. I have alts of just about every other class that effectively do nothing. I collect appearances, also known as transmogrification items, for the sake of looking like a goofball. Mounts are nice, but they're not that big of a deal. And for now, that's about it on what I do in WoW. What's kept me playing, apart from the sunk cost fallacy Skinner box emotional hamster wheel that I'm hopelessly trapped in, is that I look forward to things. I look forward to the next raid or dungeon with cool things that drop that let me kind of change up how I play. Like, it's a subtle chase of wanting to feel cool through my looks or my gameplay. It's to feel successful when I take what's given and I win, in spite of maybe community leaders who insist that following the meta, the most accepted class or gameplay style is like the path to success. I like that I can make choices, knowing that the next season or tier or whatever is likely to make me consider, maybe different choices or tweaks, even if I'm never going to change my class. And of course, my guild. It's a home to those who are both dedicated players or seasonal players or who are just fair weather fans. But we come back together to beat the big bad boss, and then we linger around for a while and we leave and come back and so on and so forth until the next thing comes along. It's worked out for over a decade, and like I said, I'm just gonna keep on chugging along. But I'm also a big fan of role-playing games, Japanese RPGs to be specific, and I've been playing them since the early 90s. Final Fantasy IV or 2 on the SNES was my very first entry into the genre, and I've made more than a few claims that it changed/ruined my life just from seeing a quick succession of encounters in Fabul Castle. Fans, I hope you guys remember that one. But yeah, like the story, the setting, the characters, it all stood out to me. And it's thanks to that game that I found a new level of depth that I've never realized before, that a video game can evoke emotions and can have personality that extends beyond just punching enemies in the face or jumping on their heads. From the Final Fantasies to the Breath of Fire series and Lunar and Lufia 2, yeah, Ogre Battle and Star Ocean, the second story because the other ones not so much, and Xenogears and all the Secrets of Mana games and Suikoden and Legend of Dragoon and Radiata stories and Dragon Age and the list goes on. That foundation in many ways helps me appreciate what 14 does, but I'm gonna have a lot more to say on that later. And finally, because God, I love talking about me, finally I'm a commentator who covers the World of Warcraft. Now I'd like to say that I look at the game with a measured criticism, even though my bias is unavoidable, but my goal has always been to cover the game with a strong sense of neutrality and empathy for the impossibly wide spectrum of its player base. I try to demonstrate understanding without falling into emotional traps or using them on viewers as if I were some echo chamber. Like, you do not watch me to feel validated, okay? And I make guides, I explain features, and I break down gameplay loops too. So when I began this project, I knew that it wouldn't be short. I didn't want to just half-ass it and do a bullet point list of, well, here's where WoW sucks or is great, and then put it against 14. That's not how I do things. It would just be a hit piece. All I would do with that is contribute to the circle jerk, and no one would learn anything, least of all me. So that means Project 14 is like a subject-by-subject breakdown of the entire experience as I experience it. So I'm gonna miss things as we go along. Maybe I'll circle back, maybe I won't. And that's why this first entry of the series is going to cover what I've played through and can best speak to first, which is storytelling. Not exactly story, but storytelling. It sounds like a good first round, right? I mean, WoW's storytelling design versus 14's storytelling design, and it should be a total bloodbath, right? Maybe. But I really hope that you folks enjoy this series and this first episode, and finally, here we go. I said I'd talk about storytelling in WoW and in Final Fantasy XIV, but not the story itself, because that's kind of a pointless comparison, or maybe it's one-sided, depending on your experience with both MMOs. If we step back though, and we look at the Final Fantasy and Warcraft teams, the differences here are almost embarrassing, right? Because Final Fantasy has a pedigree. It's a 37-year-old franchise with dozens of games, hundreds of characters, a few different universes, and unmatched experience in their refinement in storytelling. In their space, they're pretty much peerless. That's even if I personally might have found the World of Ruin in Final Fantasy VI to be a bit too open-ended, and Final Fantasy X to be a little bit too restricted in its pathing until the Calm Lands, when it's oddly like really open, or 15 with a long-ass train ride. Well, anyway, blips aside, the team at Square, excuse me, they have a really long resume. They know how to tell a story and how to use its characters as paintbrushes to give it even greater vividness. Now, Warcraft as a franchise, it's no joke either, but its roots as a real-time strategy game left more or less a very bare bones blueprint for storytelling and exposition. We got like a few scrolling lines for context and a mission objective and a few cutscenes, but it left players to, read the manual? Or to just use their imagination to fill the gaps. And that's why over the years, the story that once was has been filled out with all sorts of lore, sometimes with pretty mixed results. But even then, that wasn't, or at least that doesn't seem like it was the primary focus for the Blizzard team. The way I see it, the lore was just meant to be minimal. The story lay in your actions, in the open-ended battle that was before you. Because in RTS games, the stories come from the heat of combat, the moment-to-moment gameplay that you own, that you yourself write. Let me try to rephrase this a little bit though. Like, RPGs, or Japanese RPGs like Final Fantasy, tell stories, and there's combat to accentuate it. RTS games like Warcraft set up a clear but a pretty simple premise to set the stage, while the combat creates these stories. We come away from these RPGs like, whoa, that was like a really good story. And we come away from RTS games like, dude, that one match was awesome because the enemy was coming at me with all this stuff, and then I was left with one troop, but we still won. Oh, that was dope. That's why a good bit of the longevity of RTS games comes from the multiplayer aspect of it. And the same goes for FPS games that happen to have a campaign mode. I mean, like, there's story, but it's a one and done sort of thing, unless there's a co-op, and then we get to have a different conversation on games like Halo, Destiny, or Borderlands. And one more side note before going back on topic, strategy games like Final Fantasy Tactics or Tactics Ogre or Fire Emblem take another sort of shift in balance, with intermissions that have a whole lot of story, and in some cases fewer opportunities at combat, but much longer engagement made even more meaningful with things like permanent death. So let's go back to 14. Or maybe even Final Fantasy XI, like, which I only played for a short time, but Square took their style and mastery of Japanese RPGs and crafted their own style of MMO with its own balance between storytelling and the other features of MMOs like group combat and professions and community. It's almost rigid with its execution and effectively makes 14 into two games. There's the MMO side of it, which as of this writing, I've dipped like half a toe into, and the more traditional RPG storytelling side of the game, which I've been playing through with the single-mindedness of how I've always played MMORPGs. I've said this a bunch of times in videos and tweets and such that 14's story, from Realm Reborn to Shadowbringers, is like outstandingly okay. It's like really, really competent. It's good. But it's just good. And maybe that's what I get for playing so many other JRPGs in the past. Like, it lets me appreciate what 14 does, but to me, it's just another story with really piss-easy combats, at least when progressing only through the story. I'm not going to try to spoil anything for those of you who are here wondering, hey, maybe I should be playing 14. But it has all the tropes. The story has always seemed obvious, but I should really stop there because it's just story. Story is art, and art is subjective. The storytelling, though, the method in which 14 and the World of Warcraft direct players from point A to point Z, this is what I found to be really interesting. That's why I wanted to talk about it. 14's story pacing is really roundabout, and it borrows from its previous experiences in RPGs. So here's an anecdote. I was playing through Shadowbringers, where the overarching plot, at least so far, for me is to beat up like these 5 main bad guys, okay? And I think I was on number 2 at the time. So to get to this bad guy number 2, he's holed up in a castle, but I can't just go into the castle is sealed. In order to get to the castle, I need a handful of these relics or keys. In order to get each key, because they're all in different places obviously, I need to complete a whole mix of mundane tasks. And as I was going through it, like at certain points, I was thinking to myself, I feel separated like several degrees away from my primary objective, and I admit that I started to feel mentally fatigued a bit. Now, to be fair, WoW did almost the same as recently as here in the Shadowlands expansion. During a big quest line, there's a door to open. And to open this door, I need to enchant this MacGuffin sword with runes. So here I go, traversing the lands of the dead to complete these kind of mundane tasks needed to obtain said runes. But compared to 14's example, Shadowlands moves on so much faster, and the difference lay with the speed at which these milestones are covered and the frequency to which it happens, because it only really happens that one time. Playing through 14 feels like a walk through a minefield of very unnecessary distractions, but I forgive it, because those forgettable distractions give breathing room for its more memorable characters to shine and to be more loved or hated. If I were to say that 14 was a proper story-centric MMORPG, by comparison, WoW would be like, yeah, it sounds like a diss, because it kind of is a diss, but we're gonna get back to that. 14 is, first and foremost, a storyteller. You start a new game and you get a pretty lengthy cutscene, one of hundreds that you're going to see in your career in Final Fantasy XIV, and all of this is to set the stage and provide context and exposition. The characters that you meet in said cutscenes establish something that WoW just does not, and that's personality, tone, nuance. Body language and facial expressions and tics help players build a connection to the characters that they're watching. It can be camaraderie with that one-armed total badass. It could be thirsting over any number of pretty boys and pretty girls. It could be one of those, OMG, they did not just do that to that person, I am gonna kill that It's a performance. It's a visual novel. And it can be kind of jarring at times. In 14, when it's time to talk to a character or enter a cutscene, the MMO side of the game just stops. We disconnect from the MMO in favor of the person or the event that's now in front of us, because that is what's more important. That's what the game is telling us is the focus. If there's a cutscene in the middle of a dungeon, yeah, y'all can wait while I look at the camera like, woo, going to and fro. If there's a cutscene when your dungeon queue pops, well, it's time to make a tough decision, huh? Because, again, that's the priority, 14's characters and context. I had to tell myself that this would take some getting used to. I kept doing that until I got far enough in the game to, well, sort of give up and conclude that I really can't get used to this, but I just gotta suck it up. Now, I'm used to RPGs. I'm totally familiar with the intro town where I don't do jack squat for a long time and I go through one tutorial after the next and so on. I'm used to not being in combat for long stretches before it's finally time to dive into something and start swinging, but I'm also used to having a healthy balance between combat and context, and in playing through the main story quest line or the MSQ, yeah, that balance definitely is not there. I've commented this on a few times publicly, and the response has mostly been, well, at least you only have to do this once, right? Or actually the thing that I hear the most would be like, oh, why don't you just do some other activity? There's tons of stuff to do in the game. You can break the monotony. And so I do. I end up going back to WoW for a little bit. And for some reason, people did not appreciate that reply. I do think it's great that, without shame, Square prioritizes itself and it puts its story first. I just find it exhausting at times. More often than not, I do want to get what's going on, but there are also plenty of times where I'm also like, dude, let's Let's get on with it already, alright? This is gonna sound like a troll, but maybe 14 should just have an offline mode, so I can play through the MSQ with the trust system, use NPC characters to go through all the dungeons and trials and then sell that like a AAA title. And I really don't find that to be so unreasonable of an idea. This is also the part where I should reveal just how it is that I'm playing through the MSQ. You see, the way that I'm wired, I look at an MMO and I break it down into a series of singular obsessions. It keeps me motivated without feeling too overwhelmed, especially when, in this case, the MMO has aged for a bit. In 14, the obvious decision for me to make was to play through the MSQ over everything else, which I'm sure that some would be eager to say, wow, that is the wrong way to play the game, which is kind of like a douchey thing to say. Like, it's my experience and I want to play it however I want. So that's what I did. No extra dungeons, no side quests, no professions, not even player housing. I want to see how the main story plays out. And I wanted to explore how a paladin, that obviously that's the job that I chose, I wanted to see how a paladin plays at max level, because right now, that's the only job that I'm interested in ever playing, and I would rather trivialize legacy content that I wasn't present for. I know it sounds weird, but that's just who I am as a player. What discourages me most about the MSQ is that outside of cutscenes, the MSQ is just not fun. It's just a series of tasks. Go here, talk to this person, go there, talk to that person, fetch this. It's nothing unheard of, obviously, but what makes it even more unfun is the outdoor world. I'm sort of skirting away from the main topic here, but the world is what I would also consider part of storytelling. Yeah, I mean, the outdoor world looks really cool. Like, it's got scale that I wish the World of Warcraft would go back to. It's got fidelity, it's got weather effects and color contrast and the works, but that's only one uneven half of the outdoor world. The other half includes the creatures that inhabit it and how they behave and how they add life outdoors. And straight up, 14 is just awful at it. And at the risk of sounding hyperbolic, I'm all but certain that Square just doesn't even really try at it. Go to almost any zone in the World of Warcraft. It doesn't matter if it's in Shadowlands or Classic or whatever, and you'll see encampments of mobs, maybe in a formation. Maybe they're grouped around a campfire. Maybe they're doing drills together. Maybe they're patrolling around a simple path, either alone or with a little pet thing. It's nothing that's considered revolutionary at all, but in small ways, things like that help to shape and color the world as if it was terrain. It's just moving and it feels alive. By comparison, 14's outdoor world just looks cool, but it plays really janky. It makes those quests to go click things before time runs out, or to use the camera to see a thing across a lake, or, the usual travel to this darkened, foggy spot on the map to spawn a mob just for me. It really feels low effort. Now, the duty scenarios that 14 does, those are excellent, with a caveat that's for another video, but for the most part, those are fun and even challenging at times, because you got all sorts of things happening. You got NPCs fighting each other, there are scripted events, there's dialogue, albeit there's no voices, you just get like chat bubbles, and I feel like I'm part of the action alongside these characters that I've been listening to day in and day out, and that helps. I just find it super baffling when comparing cutscenes and these cool duty scenarios to the regular outdoor world. It's like night and day, while in the World of Warcraft, you can find that level of world interaction in a world quest. My takeaway is that, at least for me, outdoor combat contributes to storytelling, and 14 doesn't pull it off in a way that makes me feel involved. But with all that said, too, let's turn to WoW for a little bit, with storytelling that's, well, it's kind of like that. WoW storytelling is... Warcraft as a franchise is perfectly capable of telling compelling story when given the chance. Unfortunately, most of those opportunities take place outside of the game, and thus it's outside of the context of this video, but it's thanks to that straight up WoW does not set up its in-game story with the same careful pacing or exposition. It doesn't give you enough time to understand and connect. And more importantly, we don't get to know its characters on a deeper level because by and large, World of Warcraft's character and story pacing, it just gets right to the point because it wants you pushing buttons and killing bad guys and looting stuff. With less room for that kind of time to bond, I think viewers mostly attach themselves to the little spattering of spicy quotes and one-liners. On the other hand, WoW really does like to drop players straight into the action and make that part of the story being told. If 14 is about story observation, WoW is about story interaction. Like if you make a character in 14, you get dropped into the city of your race and you start learning the ins and outs of this really massive space, which is cool. But notably during Shadowbringers, I not so fondly remember my first combat experience in that expansion was like an hour or so in, after taking the tour of the hub and watching and listening to this Fae person explain to me how in-game mail works in this other place too, whoop-de-doo. But anyway, eventually I had to travel to some place and then I was told to defeat a few rats because the barkeep wouldn't take my money and I just wanted water. That was my first combat interaction in Shadowbringers. And I was pretty pissed off. I moved on from it, but it just left this really bad impression that this game is not very interested in letting me play through the story as opposed to just having me sit down and watch it. On a side note, on YouTube, there's like videos that play through all of 14's cutscenes, and I was tempted, man. I was really tempted, but I want to see my guy keep nodding his head like he's the Mandalorian. Like if you're wondering, yeah, that's gear from a boosted job that I paid for, and I'm gonna wear that helmet of shame forever. On the flip side, if you make a new character in the World of Warcraft, there is a quest in front of you to immediately commit acts of violence against like a target dummy or some neutral mob, depending on how it is that you start. The notion of getting you interacting with the world directly reflects heavily into pretty much everything WoW. Like, here we go, first expansion, Burning Crusade. You walk through the dark portal and you're treated to this vista of everyone's fighting, right? And then you're dropped into an outpost that's been held for decades according to the lore, but you got no time for that, all right? You got to immediately deploy yourself out to support its defense. In the expansion after that, you're dropped in to assist folks that are under attack by, I think, rogue elementals and these crazy cultists. The expansion after that, you're dropped in to fight the opposite faction over, well, nothing but mutual hatred. Expansion after that, and this is as masculine as you can get. Like Green Bro straight up Spartan kicks an invader through this portal and then YOLOs through said portal into like, oh man, oh dude, let's do this, you know? Expansion after that, demon invasion. You're dropped right in. And then the next expansion, it's an assault / defense of a faction capital because again, mutual hatred. And finally, in this expansion, we're dropped into World of Warcraft hell and need to find a way out. So there's a pattern. Fight first, ask questions while jogging over to the next fight. When walking into each of Final Fantasy XIV's expansions, it felt like a walking tour, and that's not bad. It just wasn't very memorable because while there was plenty of walking and talking and picking up teleport points, I didn't have much of any interactions with the world to associate with the intro that really pulls me in or just makes it memorable. Now, both are fine ways to tell a story with good and bad points to it. And I'm embracing my bias here, but I both hate and appreciate the abruptness of how World of Warcraft throws me from one thing to the next, at least at the scale of small storylines. One of its cooler features that I know some people hate are the talking heads. It's an evolution of what WoW does a lot, which is to explain on the move, like you pick up a quest and maybe stick around for some additional banter if it's applicable, and then it informs us as we go along and move from objective to objective. Like it's brief, but it's got a natural feel to it because we're in this constant state of urgency. There isn't really much downtime at all. And that's another big break between 14 and WoW. That thanks to 14's cutscenes breaking you out of the MMO gameplay, it gives a lot of latitude for downtime and winding down. There are a handful of times during the Shadowbringers expansion where my helmeted hero just sat to talk with someone before going to bed. The champion of Azeroth has no bed. Something player housing. But when we step back and look at the big picture and how WoW presents its grander stories through expansions, they don't just cut corners, like they take the corners and then they throw out the rest. I can envision like this grand multi-expansion saga of the Legion invasion. I can see an entire expansion based on the assault from the evil old gods. There are just way too many wasted opportunities because Blizzard thinks that players want to move on, and you know what? Maybe they're right. Speaking for me though, I know that I prefer to have more to sink my teeth into. I think it would open up opportunities for the story of WoW to not escalate as fast as it has been. Shadowlands does feel like it has a chance for this saga of Warcraft to end, and in a new saga the story can build up a little bit more slowly. Maybe we can grow to love and hate these new characters, you know, that sort of thing. When it comes to just the way it tells stories, I think both games can pick up a lot from each other. It can take more time for character development. It can put more personality into the outdoor world. It can make the questing feel a little bit more interactive and add a lot more side content to inform and plant potential seeds for later stories. And this whole thing has been just about storytelling. There is so much that I probably neglected to talk about just on this subject, but the purpose of this and the upcoming pieces is to encourage more discussion and to not drag it down with negativity. Please don't bring that into the comments. It's great if you prefer one game or the other. It's great if you play both, but again, we don't need that sort of like vitriol in the comments. But I do want to hear from you. I've been giving a really narrow perspective and I want to hear your feedback. Like, was I too biased? Did I miss something or anything like that? And again, there's just so much more to talk about. Like, topics that I've jotted down include social interactions between players, breaking down endgame and motivations, the differences in combat, professions, although I'm sure that's going to be like a one-sided conversation, maybe collections, although that's also probably going to be a one-sided conversation. But before I descend into like this hopeless anxiety over how this video is going to be torn apart from both the WoW and the FF community, I do want to thank you for watching and listening. This means a lot to me to do this project, and I do plan on continuing to play both games the way that I feel. The way that I feel like it, and really that's all that matters, right? So please like the video if you enjoyed yourself, leave some feedback, and consider subscribing to the channel so you know when the next part of this series comes out. It might be a little while because, you know, I gotta play the game, but I hope to see you next time. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy. They're gonna kill me. It's gonna suck. Stupid shell, stupid WoW shell, stupid Final Fantasy shell. Something WoW and I don't know what they're gonna do.